Yeah, it's been a minute since I've talked about Prehistoric Planet, and seeing how this season is talking about prehistoric mammals and everything that came after the dinosaurs, I figured, what the heck, let's talk about it. Because me personally, I find prehistoric mammals / the creatures that came after the dinosaurs just as interesting, if not a little bit more interesting personally. Prehistoric Planet Season 3, I think, is another incredible season of this show. I think it continues to play to all its strengths for the most part. Let's go over the cons. And I wouldn't even really say cons, this is just maybe stuff that I just noticed. A lot of this is going to be very nitpicky. I'm really just talking about this season as a whole. I would say probably the biggest drawback is the music in comparison to the first two seasons. The first two seasons, the music was incredible. I mean, it's Hans Zimmer. There's a lot of really great musical pieces that I still will listen to in my personal playlist. Whereas here, I am not really recalling any that at least stuck out to me personally. But it was something that as I was watching and even trying to pay attention to the music, I was not really having any really memorable parts. But I would say that's probably really the only complaint that I have. And the rest is pretty much all just pros at this point, with the biggest one being the CGI. I mean, the first two seasons of Prehistoric Planet, the CGI looks absolutely incredible. You know, everyone says how realistic it looks, and I feel like it has become the new standard for dinosaur documentaries in terms of what we expect the quality to be. It really pushed the envelope. But the first two seasons definitely have set the standard. Season 3, Prehistoric Planet Ice Age, has definitely upped the bar even more, because the CGI in here is just somehow even better than the first two seasons. You really get to see the difference when you have all these different textures on animals, with fur, and seeing how the fur interacts with all these different environments. From a visual standpoint, I would say the one segment that really stuck out to me was probably the Elasmotherium and the hot lava baths, which when you see the mud just coating all the hair of the Elasmotherium, you're like, holy cow, this looks incredible. And if you've ever seen rhino's mud in real life, it looks one for one. And I realize this as watching it, but I'm for sure that's got to be a Mudhorn reference from The Mandalorian, given that Jon Favreau is producing this, and he's also, played a huge creative part in The Mandalorian. I would say another standout in terms of visual effects for me personally was the Gigantopithecus scene. The whole documentary has probably some of my favorite segments out of all of Prehistoric Planet. Again, I'm biased. I do tend to like prehistoric mammals and all the Cenozoic creatures a tiny bit more than dinosaurs. Not saying dinosaurs aren't awesome. I think it's just between the two. I have always been a little more drawn to mammals, and that's my real life were mammals. So what can you do? But the Gigantopithecus scene just absolutely blew me away. Seeing the close-up detail of the Gigantopithecus, it looked just so realistic, even more than just the fur, the texture of the hands. But you look at the hand shot of the Gigantopithecus and you look at your own hand, and you can see how they got all the imperfections that you would see in your own hand with the line wrinkles and the little chips and scratches and everything. Look at your own most likely very clean hand in front of you, but you can still see just how well they're able to capture it. In terms of a visual effects standpoint, I got no complaints on season 3. I can't think of a single segment that looked bad in any way, or I'm that looks a little CGI heavy. And I would say, probably the last part to talk about is the segments, and kind of some of my favorite segments and what I thought as a whole. It's still the same setup as the first two seasons, where instead of an overarching narrative and say the Walking With series, it's more on individual segments, usually tied around a general theme for the entire episode. But in the case of season 3, the episodes are as follows, which the first one being The Big Freeze, which is kind of the beginning of the Ice Age. Then the next one is New Lands, which is talking about the continental land bridge that formed between North America and South America, and how because of it, a lot of different species from each continent were able to cross over, and how they had to adapt into coming across these new variants of either similar or completely new species they had never met. Then the third episode is Desert Lands, which is talking about the hot climate era that were also forming around during the ice ages. Number 4 is talking about grasslands, and then number 5 is finally the big melt, which is kind of the end of the ice age. And an interesting thing while watching this season in particular is a lot of these animals that are shown have modern day counterparts, whether directly related or being a branch off. And so a lot of the behavior felt more realistic than less speculative compared to the first two seasons, just because with dinosaurs they're so old that we're only able to predict so much on how they actually behaved. Whereas here, a lot of these animals, they probably acted similar to these animals, with the woolly woolly mammoth or the dwarf stegodons. Those probably acted very similar to elephants. Seeing the little baby dwarf stegodon was incredibly adorable, and I want it. But it was also cool seeing some modern day speculation comparisons. I would say, at least for me, the one that stuck out was Gigantopithecus, and seeing it use tools, similar to how a chimpanzee and an orangutan would. But it makes sense, because you're, great apes, we're pretty smart. As a fellow dino/animal nerd, I would say a lot of the animals in these segments, I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen those in this documentary. Oh, I've read that in this book. But I would say the one that really caught me off guard was the giant otter segment. I feel like I have seen a short, probably from a paleo YouTuber. Maybe it was Dino Guy, maybe it was, I can't think of any other ones. I'm just thinking of Dino Guy because I really like his cowboy hat, his beautiful, beautiful cowboy hat. It's always fun when you get something that's very shocking for you personally. I would say probably top segment, I would say pretty much the two ground sloth segments, with the one where the Ice Age ground sloths, I don't remember if they ever said a specific name, but where they're rolling around in the snow, very similar to polar bears, and they're climbing the trees and eating the pine needles. I thought that was a really good segment. I'm always a sucker for seeing animals just playing around and being silly, at least in terms of a wild setting, doing these more playful and silly behaviors than just like the bare necessities of, hunting, eating, mating, territory, protecting young, raising young, like that type of stuff. It's that another element that I think really gets overlooked in a lot of animal documentaries, whether modern or prehistoric. I'm always appreciative of seeing more out there dynamics and aspects of animals living than I would say compared to just the basic stuff. And my other favorite segment also goes to the giant ground sloth segment, where you see it tearing apart the cannonball trees and the squirrels trying to get in little bits before it gets crushed, and how you see the squirrel fawning around this giant sloth. And I really like that it's a hairless depiction of the giant ground sloth, because it kind of lends into the idea of that T-Rex most likely didn't have feathers, because an animal that large is going to generate a lot of heat, and feathers is going to make it overheat very quickly, which would be good if it lived in a cold climate, say like a woolly mammoth, but that's not the case for these animals. So it was very weird seeing it, but it made sense from what we know about large animals and body covering and living in hot environments. And that's just kind of a brief overview for Prehistoric Planet Season 3. I highly recommend that you check it out. I would say, in terms of actual segments, I probably liked a lot of these segments more than the first two seasons. Not saying that the first two seasons are bad. If anything, I think Prehistoric Planet has become one of the most impactful dinosaur documentary pieces of media within the last decade, I would say. I can't really think of any, at least for the better of paleo knowledge, I would say. So it's cool to see a documentary have such an impactful, positive impact on paleofauna, if that's even a word, paleo life for the common public. But that being said, that's kind of my just general thoughts on Prehistoric Planet Season 3. If there's a lot of comments asking for individual talks about each individual episode and everything, and this video does well, I'll do it. So if you would want that, my name's Cameron. Spank all those buttons, stay safe out there, and I'll see you all later. Bye bye.